use the chance to move to Professor Owen, and I think that coming on exactly on the time is to try to understand the principle of international law, the equitable and reasonable utilization and obligation against significant harm when we speak about shared rivers or international rivers. And if you can just highlight on the understanding of equitable utilization and not causing significant harm, and tell us how can we commit countries. We have two different cases now, the case of Iraq and the case of Egypt, that are very similar. The upstream country is making decisions, taking actions, and not interested even in signing any kind of agreement. Could you please tell us how it's possible to commit upstream countries, or all the countries, upstream and downstream, to the principles of the international law?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking the Government of Egypt and the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation for facilitating my engagement at Cairo Water Week and in this high-level panel. I'm very honored to join this panel. You ask one of the most central questions in international water law and in international water diplomacy. International water law comprises three key substantive principles. There are also procedural requirements, and I'll talk about those in a moment because they're very central. These are the duty to utilize shared waters, a shared river, a shared aquifer, a shared lake, in an equitable and reasonable manner. Now, this is a vague rule. It simply means that states must have regard to the interests of other states, that they must consider what the needs and interests of other states are before engaging in uses themselves. So it requires, it's a due diligence idea. It requires that states take care to understand the needs, vulnerabilities, concerns, and requirements of their neighbors. The duty to prevent significant harm is very closely related to the equitable and reasonable utilization principle. They are really two sides of one coin. If you cause significant harm to another state, you have not considered their legitimate sovereign interests. The third key principle is that of cooperation, that states must take every reasonable effort to cooperate with their co-riparian neighboring states, to engage in joint institutions, to meet, to share information, to notify of new projects and new uses. So if we look at your three questions from earlier, the problem of mitigating impacts and reducing risks, due to climate change and human intervention, I would suggest that the immediate risk that climate change presents, of course, there is a longer term risk, but the immediate risk is that states will rush to unilateral development of watercourses. They will rush to unilateral utilization. And international water law must be observed to try to prevent states from only considering their own interests, from rushing to protect their own interests. When we look at key instruments of international water law, such as the UN Watercourses Convention of 1997, which is a compilation, a codification of existing practice. In addition to equitable and reasonable utilization, it mentions optimal utilization. And I think this is a term that is going to become more and more important in the context of the problems discussed today. The problem of climate change, the problem of population growth, the problem of political instability, etc. That there is a duty on states to seek to optimize and maximize the benefits derived from water. Now that places a really far-reaching obligation on states that on the basis of equity, they must consider efficient use. They must consider the maintenance of ecosystems and the ecosystem services provided. They must work to understand each other's dependency on shared water courses. And by dependency, I mean to understand the reality of food security, energy security, of the need for economic and social development, and of course, allied to all of these, political stability and security. Now, what does this require? This requires states to engage in benefit sharing, to engage in adaptive management, to respond to political instability or to respond to the unpredictable impacts of climate change. Benefit sharing in order that, upstream states have an incentive to act, to implement good stewardship of a shared basin. Maybe downstream states can help with the costs of such stewardship, or even with foregoing development opportunities. Where development does occur upstream, that maybe the benefits derived from that development should be shared across the basin. These are very complex issues, and they will require really intensive cooperation between states, which will require robust institutions. And this is really what's very important, because only through those robust institutions will we have effective interstate communication involving notification of projects, early and meaningful notification around full environmental and social impact assessment according to agreed international methodologies, strategic environmental assessment for programs of activities, ongoing sharing of information in a meaningful and cooperative manner. And this is really the challenge. This is the alternative to unilateral development, which has no regard for the interests of other states. That way can only lead to trouble. I would recommend certain institutions such as the UNECE acting as the secretariat to the Water Convention, the 92 Water Convention, who are developing guidelines, for example, guidelines on the conclusion of water agreements, what should be in water agreements when states sit down to consider frameworks for sharing, who are centrally involved in the reporting exercise on SDG 6.5.2 on transboundary cooperation. So sharing experience, compiling, developing an inventory of cooperative practice. This is very, very important so that there is a transparent mechanism. States can see what other states do in terms of their transboundary cooperation. And this must create more, I don't want to say pressure, but more it must develop in states the instinctive commitment towards cooperation, which is what we need to do, what international law needs to encourage, needs to promote.
Thank you very much for this very interesting feedback. And I think I've been taking many notes of some new ideas that I really didn't know before. Maybe if, because we need to close, I think His Excellency Carl Herman wanted to add something regarding the small scale farmers. And we take one question from the, are you willing to stay overnight here? So we have here 3 hands, 4 hands. Allow me, I know I'm not very, يعني مش أظرف واحد في الدنيا. So we take one question من معالي السفير أحمد, and then we hear the missing comment from His Excellency Carl Herman about the small scale farmers, and then we have to close. We still have 2 sessions, and the dinner, I think it's like, what time? 6 o'clock. So forget the dinner because we have 2 sessions.
Because of equitable and reasonable utilization and the obligation not to cause significant harm could be implemented unilaterally. That is to say, one state would just decide that I would decide what is equitable and reasonable and what would constitute significant harm to the other party unilaterally without consulting in advance with them. If that is all right under international law. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. In my opinion, no, it is not possible. Because if you think of lawyers refer to these obligations, both of them, as being due diligence obligations. In other words, the obligation on the state that is engaging in a project, the obligation is to take all reasonable care. All reasonable care. Now, if you even think of those words, I hope they work in Arabic in the same as in English. All reasonable care must mean that you engage with those people, those countries, those neighbors that may be affected. So how can you say you have taken all reasonable care if you have not sought to understand, if in a simple case of a basin, if you have not sought to understand what your neighbor's plans are? Will your plans interfere with their plans? You could not have taken all reasonable care. I think that is axiomatic. It's a matter of logic.
Thank you very much. His Excellency Karl Herman, you want to add something?
I just wanted to make comments on small-scale farmers and the support that one gives them. We have an example where we supported small-scale farmers by creating cold storage facilities so that they can improve marketability of their produce and the logistics aspect thereof. But what happened then is that the same farmers were burdened with high tariffs and storage costs in that cold storage. So at the end of the day, it was a zero gain sum. You made it possible for the farmers to have better infrastructure to their disposal, but at the same time, you burdened them to operate them. So at the end of the day, they came out with, if anything at all. So one must be careful how the burden of that development is shared as part of which that was, I think, important point.
Thank you very much for the valuable feedback. If any other comment from the panelists, please, Your Excellency.
أنا لو سمحت لي فقط أعلق على سؤال سعادة السفير حول القرار الأحادي، يعني أنه دولة تقرر هذا احتياجك، هذا إنصافك. طبعا هذه واردة في حسابات دول المنبع المستقرة والمتمكنة والتي تملك خلينا نقول المنابع والقوة، وهذا ما دا يحصل حاليا في حال العراق ومصر، وبالتأكيد حالة العراق ومصر متشابهة إلى درجة قد تصل إلى 95%. هذه الفرضية ممكن أن تطبق اللي حضرتك أشرت إليها في حال هناك ما يسمى بالIWRM اللي هي أو الإدارة المتكاملة للموارد المائية، أي تجلس الدول المتشاطئة وتحدد الاحتياج. قد تكون هذه الدولة مستقرة سياسيا واقتصاديا وتعمل على تطوير مشاريعها، تأخذ احتياجها، ومثل ما يقول الجميع وما أشار إلى الرئيس السيسي أنه من حق دول المنبع أن تطور مشاريعها، ولكن لا تحاسبني إذا كانت لدي مشاكل كدولة مصب وتتهمني بهدر المياه لأنه أحارب أو أقاتل أو لدي مشاكل. لذلك الحصة أو الكمية المخصصة لدولة المصب يجب أن تحدد بالاتفاق. هذه احتياجاتي، أنا سوف أعمل على تطوير مشاريعي بالمستقبل، لا تحاسبني من الآن، لا تستغل هذا الموضوع كدولة منبع وتقرر من جانب واحد أنه هذه الحصة في حساباتك أنت كدولة منبع، تقرر هذه الدولة تأخذ هذه الكمية لأنك تريد أن تكون أو تضع هذه الدولة في حساباتك. هذه الدولة من حقها أن تطور مشاريعها، ولكن حدد لي الحصة واترك الباقي. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا جزيلا معالي الوزير. تفضل.
كلمة واحدة فقط. يمكن برضو السفير أحمد يعني أثار موضوع غاية في الأهمية، ويمكن في وجود بروفيسور قد يكون من المهم جدا إن احنا ننظر إلى الأمر، هل هو التزام ببذل عناية أم بتحقيق نتيجة؟ هو التزام بتحقيق نتيجة، ليس فقط بذل عناية. يمكن مشكلة القانون الدولي هو عدم وجود سلطة عليا أو سلطة تنفيذية لإنفاذ القانون، ولكن هنا يجب على الدول في إطار التعاون ومبادئ القانون الدولي وتجنب الصراعات والابتعاد عن التصرفات الأحادية، هنا على الدولة أن تبذل كل جهد ليس لبذل عناية ولكن لتحقيق نتيجة وهي المشاركة في المورد المائي. نقطة أخيرة دكتور هاني، بس برضه في وجود البروفيسور، إن مفوضيات الأنهار حينما تتحدث فهناك مبدئين أساسيين في مفوضيات الأنهار: التشاور أو الإخطار المسبق لأنه نوع من التشاور، والنقطة الثانية المهمة جدا هي ان اتخاذ القرار بيتم بطريقة جماعية، لا يمكن ابدا ان نغلب الاغلبية، لانه تغليب الاغلبية في قرارات تتعلق بحوض نهر تعني ان دول المصبات وهي الحلقة الاضعف في سلسلة الانهار ستكون دائما في موقف منفرد مقابل دول المنابع. دول المنابع سوف تفرض الأغلبية على دول المصبات، وبالتالي ستكون دول المصبات هي المتضرر من القرارات التي ستتخذ من خلال المفوضية إذا لم يكن هناك إجماع على الاتفاق على مشروع محدد. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا معالي السفير. Yeah, we just if you take a couple of seconds and then because we really have to finish. Go ahead.
Yes, thank
Sorry,
you
to
very much.
respond to,
Do you want to respond?
oh, no, sorry, I thought you were asking.
No, he requested the word.
Please.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Very interesting debate, but I think we forget what one of the panel members said, and it is.
Can you get closer to the microphone, please?
It is actually a political process that we are facing. Am I heard? Okay. One of the panel members said we are actually sitting with a political problem. I think it was the ambassador who said that. And the difficulty that we sometimes struggle to overcome is the principle that might is right. As a small country, we believe, therefore, that that is the job of multilateral arrangements. It is only through multilateral arrangements that are binding that we can tackle the might is right problem in situations like this. I thought that
Thank you very much for all the panelists. His Excellency Carl Herman, Minister of Agriculture, Water and Land Reform, Republic of Namibia. His Excellency Engineer Mahdi Rashid Al-Hamdani, Minister of Iraq. His Excellency Ambassador Sharif Isa, Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs for African Affairs, representing His Excellency Samah Shukri. Professor Owen, Professor at School of Law, University College, Cork, Ireland. Thank you very much for the very interesting discussion, and panels, thank you for your audience. And now I call the next session. Please, the panelists to come on the stage. Thank you very much.